There we go. Now everybody can hear me. Wow. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is John Crookwell, Communications and Cigars, and no, stupid issue. You know what? Here's the deal. I had the flu. Alrighty. We'll first start out with that, why I was gone. So people actually got concerned, sent me an email and saying, John, I haven't seen you on the show. You didn't have a show. Everything okay? You're still out and about. Some people asked if I got shut down. I'm like, no, I didn't get shut down, but now everybody should be able to hear me. And no, I just unfortunately had the flu. Thank God it was only the flu, but it really took me out. It really hit me hard. That's where I was. I wasn't in hiding. No, the government didn't track me down or anything like that. And no, as some people joked around and emailed and messaged me and said, oh, he was talking about things he probably should not have, given the multiple hats that I wear. So, you'll see me take a couple of drinks, and it is only water. This is not Communications and Cognac, which, hey, that's not a bad idea. I was told that, hey, did you think you maybe got the flu or of course it progresses like almost into pneumonia. So you're on antibiotics. So it kicks your butt. But anyways, no, I did not get the flu. No, I did not have possible pneumonia or anything like that for cigars. But hey, if that's going to be the case, then we'll turn it into Communications and Cognac, which, hey, that might be more of interesting content. However, we are back, and thank you for everybody that tuned in. Thanks for T.O. sending them over there. A lot of people do the Monday night rounds, go out to T.O.'s show, and then come on over to here. So we appreciate it. But tonight's going to be episode 29, believe it or not, 29 episodes since we started in season 1 here. And it's Demystify DMR. And tonight we're going to talk about part 2, which is programming. Programming is one of the biggest things I have to go ahead and say about DMR that a lot of people have issues with, and it deters a lot of people from doing DMR. And I'm not just now, once again, talking about amateur radio. I'm talking about DMR in general. And when I say general, I mean for the business user, for the amateur radio user, whatever the case may be. There is a little bit of a level to understanding how to program DMR, which really can turn a person off on there. So we're going to cover it tonight. We're going to take a look at actually some programming software for 2 different devices that I use on there. And kind of go through the walkthrough on it and everything like that on there. So, before we get started here, I want to go ahead and say, hey, if you have any questions, comments about the shows, ideas, want to drop me a line or something like that, don't hesitate. Go ahead. Communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. Once again, communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. JJK Communications does sponsor the show here. They have been very helpful and providing it and stuff like that. May have a new sponsor coming on soon, maybe. We'll see here. But it does help sometimes, with the equipment that goes into it. A lot does go into producing a show and what have you. So if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, feel free to go ahead and drop a line. So getting back to it. Tonight, Demystifying DMR Part 2. Got a lot of actually good feedback. Had some comments and suggestions that came in about DMR. Some people were actually really shocked at the amount of things that DMR can do. A lot of people are just usually familiar with it doing like the tier 2 thing, as we talked about, which is just basically using it as repeaters. And using it as repeaters from, like an amateur standpoint or work, they pick up the radio, push to talk, release to listen, hear the chirps, the beeps, all that kind of stuff like that on there. But a lot of people are not really aware of how versatile it is, how much of a business tool it really can be. And a lot of people are actually surprised about the trunking aspect and stuff. I've had a few that popped in some comments and even said, hey, have you thought about actually doing a little bit more on some DMR trunking? It was kind of interesting and stuff. And maybe we'll do that. And with the other stuff that's coming up, we're going to be looking at the other digital modes also too on there. We may just take trunking and just take trunking off on its own on there, because there is a lot of trunking, and it's not just DMR trunking. It's, public safety P25 trunking, LTR trunking, Tetra. I love Tetra. Oh, do I love Tetra? I've started to play with the Tetra system that I went out, got on my own, kind of, or building here on my own. And I'll be honest with you, really, really, really cool stuff on there. It's quite amazing on there what some of the technologies of trunking can do. And like I said, I'll do that different episode, because I wish amateurs use trunking, but that's a different story. That's a different episode, as I say. So tonight we're going to talk about DMR programming. So the first thing we're going to do here is, let's not assume what we're going to be programming tonight. I guess we'll kind of lay out some of those ground rules first. This isn't necessarily going to be for amateurs. This isn't necessarily going to be for business. It's going to be kind of the concepts of programming DMR, because there are a few things that you need to kind of mix in together on there. And you know what? Before I do that, I got to go ahead and thank the people that jumped in here. So Lon, good evening for jumping in there, temporary offline. Thank you very much. The Smoking Ape is in there, and Evan also too. And then Phil, W0RHP. Thanks for jumping in. Yeah, it's, we tried to get the announcement out there for, through YouTube and stuff like that, and through some social media stuff. We're trying to grow that on there too. But guys, thank you for going ahead and checking in this evening. So we're going to go through a couple simple methods of programming. We're going to be programming in a direct form of communication, and we're just going to be using some general frequencies tonight. So that's why I don't want it to be like, oh, it's public safety or business versus amateur and stuff. No, the same concepts apply. We're just going to be throwing out some random frequencies on there. Alrighty. And then we're going to program a repeater. And then I'm going to give you some hints. And I want to stress hints. I'm not giving you opinions. I'm not giving you this is the way it should be. Okay? Because when you get into programming DMR radios, it really is kind of like a left Twix, right Twix kind of thing on there. So we're not going to go down that road, that avenue tonight. We're just going to go ahead, touch on some of the basic stuff that's on there, and then kind of proceed from that point there. So let's hop over to our computer screen here. And as you see, we have our first set of radios on here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be programming two radios. They're similar in nature. So the first one that I'm going to be doing here is actually, and I'll kind of show you here. This is a data radio. So, and I'll pull it up here. We did talk about this. Let me pull up my other screen here when I talk about. I did talk about this when I was making and showing you how to make a mobile repeater with this. So this is a Maxon data radio that I have here. And very simple, very easy. It's a 10-watt VHF radio on there. Has the data plug where we interface the power, the connection, everything on there. Has a BNC connector on there. Once again, capable of analog or DMR digital, tier 2 digital if you want to, and use that term on there. 10 watts, so this is a pretty little powerful, kind of cool radio on there. You can even actually, believe it or not, you have to change the channels with dip switches in here, so it kind of sucks if you need to change channels, but you can solder in a little channel. There's different ways to get around it, but even if you want to, this thing doesn't run on that much of battery. I mean, it runs on, where is it at? I don't remember. I have the written down over here somewhere. It's like 9 or 12 volts, and it draws like at most like 2 or 3 amps. So you want to talk about QRP radios and portable radios and stuff, and you can easily integrate a speaker mic into it. You know, you can clip off the ends here or make an adapter, plug it right into there. So this little thing is super versatile. I have these. I love them, hands down. But anyways, we're going to be first of all talking, I'll go back over to the screen here now. We're going to be first of all talking about programming this radio. And the reason I'm bringing this radio up is because this radio kind of is a concept of a mobile radio, really is what it is. Even though it's a data radio, it really, for the most part, is a mobile radio. But we're going to kind of talk about that. Is there much of a difference? No. But just to kind of show you the different software and how sort of DMR software kind of copies DMR software. So if you take a look in the upper left corner here, I kind of have it highlighted here. There's different things on there that you can talk about. The one code plug I pulled up here is UHF one. So that's there, but obviously your radio is always going to go ahead and tell you what you got going on here. So it's, frequency range, the date that's made, this and this. I'm just using a generic code plug on here that I have on there. But there's a couple key things that we need to poke out here. So first of all, your basic settings, lots of radios. Remember, DMR is a commercial-based digital voice technology. What I mean by that is that we're not dealing with amateur radio. All right, people use it for amateur radio, people use it for business, but what we're really talking about here is we're talking about the concept of a business thing. So in that case, what's going to happen is unlike amateur radios, you have a little option here of like setting like what you want it to, the alias of the radio name here. So like for an example, if I want to put John's base, let's just call it base, right? And then it will tell you what zone you want it to boot up in if you make different zones, battery saver modes. Lots of these initial things are important and are needed, excuse me, because that's what the radio needs to do. The radio needs to operate, knows to set up in a function. Amateur radios, once again, are different than business radios, LMR radios, public safety radios all over. This is especially the case here. So that's what's going on here. That's what these initial things are for here. Remote check, I'll get into this also too a little bit more on the handheld side, but that's why I said it's a mobile. When you do remote check and click on here, that is a function of DMR signaling where you can ping a radio, as I kind of call it, to see if the radio's turned on, if the radio is being used and stuff like that on there. So that's kind of a key thing that you want to have, depending on if you want to turn it on or off. Now, the reason I have this set up, and I will always turn on remote check on my radios, is when I'm using this modem type radio, I connect it to my mobile radio so that I can use that crossband repeat. The reason I have remote check on is I can ping the radio. And if I ping the radio with my DMR radio, so my handheld, I could set it to set a remote check. Boom, it sends it to the radio. The DMR radio, in this case, this radio here on the screen, hears it, sends me an ACK back. Then I could tell, oh, the radio's on, or at least I'm in range of the radio. To me, that's important when I'm doing mobile repeating, because I'm trying to talk from my handheld to this device that's in my car connected to my 50-watt, 100-watt mobile radio on there. So these are kind of a couple things that need to be checked on in your basic settings on there. Next, we're going to go to zone, and we're just going to briefly talk on zones. Zone is a collection of what you have for your channels. Now, I don't know why they put zone above that first. Well, but what we really need to do is we need to not talk to zone here. We don't need to talk to channel here. We need to go down to DMR settings. That's what should almost be next, okay? And the reason being is when we click into DMR settings, we see things that need to be set up in order for it to operate properly. So the first thing right here is it says own ID. And what that means is it's the ID of the radio. Now remember, with DMR radios, when they transmit in digital, they transmit a ID. That ID is numerical only. And I want to stress numerical only. Alrighty? And the reason you want to stress numerical only is because there's no way to put in alphanumeric characters. There's no reference to nothing or anything like that whatsoever. Now, some people say DMR IDs can duplicate. I would agree that they can duplicate if you are using the same radio across different things. But then there are people who are going to say, no, you can't duplicate a DMR radio. This is going to come down, the ID, I should say. This is going to 100% come down to how your radio needs to look at the system or talk to other radios, okay? Do I need that radio to be its own unique radio? Do I need that radio to just basically transmit in digital? And I don't care what ID is in there. That is going to be totally up to you. Looking at it from a commercial side, okay, a business side, I have every radio, DMR radio I have, has its own ID. Because in that way, that's kind of the caller ID of the radio. That's how I know what radio it is or what radio it isn't. That's how I know if I can kill a radio. That's how I know if I could stun a radio, okay? These are important things on there. Now, there's no, and I want to stress this, and this kind of comes to an amateur side, there's no official, they have a DMR database. Let's put it that way. Start out a DMR ID database, but that database does not concur to like an FCC database or any sort of other database. When you are using DMR, yeah, they tell you to use your ID, okay, and register for an ID, but in all realities, that ID is just an ID in a quote-unquote unofficial, non-FCC approved database. It's not, okay? Amateur radio licenses are a call sign, okay? An ID is not a call sign. I just want to stress that on there. The second thing is that this is where a lot of people screw up in programming DMR radios. If you're going to program a large set of radios, or you don't want to program your code plug, this is the thing in DMR. A lot of people are like, here, use my code plug. Use my code plug. And I've seen it where times where there's like 4 or 5 people talking one time, and they all had the same ID, DMR ID coming up, and that wasn't their signed DMR ID. It was the person who made the code plug, and they handed it out, and then the people who took it, all they simply did was just clone it into their radios, and they didn't bother to change the ID. So always, always, always change the ID. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and change it to generic ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Once again, whatever the case may be, DMR IDs can be 1 digit. DMR IDs can actually be up to, what did we talk about? Like, what was it? 7? I think 7 or 8 characters. So, they can go 6, 7, 8. There we go. So I can have a DMR ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once again, depending on what happens with the ID, depending on what you're using and stuff like that, go ahead. Going back to the business side of things, the IDs that I'm assigned for the business, systems that I used have a reference to do with my account. So it might be like 100 and then, 801. And then my next one might be 100, 802 and 803. There's different schemings all over the place. But in this case, we're just going to make it easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, call hang time. What this call hang time means is that when your radio has received or transmit, when it's done making a call, will it go back to basically a standby state or listening to other talk groups or not? And what this is going to do is this is going to be there. So you can have 0 call hang time. And what that means is the minute that it's done receiving a call can go back into like a standby mode, or we can go, I'm not even sure on this one here, 10 seconds, okay, where it will sit and kind of stay on that channel, stay on that talk group, that kind of thing, depending on how you have things set up. I'll get to that in a little bit because that comes to with your received groups. But call hang time, usually 1 or 2 seconds on there. DMR radios have different types of data. So this is the nice part about some software. It will tell you what it is. So OACSU waiting time sets the duration of waiting for the confirmation from the receiving radio when the user initiates an individual voice call that's receiving audio should respond with on the correct blah, 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 blah. What does that mean? Well, these are different things when we start to get into group calls versus private calls. Okay, that's a big thing. We'll cover how you make a private call and we'll cover how you make a group call in a little bit. Message waiting time. So when you want to send messages to one another, if I want to send a text message in DMR to another radio, how long is it going to wait for an ACK back on there? How many times will it try? Now when we start to get into parameters here, such as voice header parameters, response parameters, all these kind of things, lots of these are going to be changed if it's user specific. Alrighty. 9 times out of 10, you don't have to deal with any of these, especially in a tier 2 system. But if you start getting into a system where you're sending a lot of data and stuff, that's where these are going to get involved. That's where these are going to play a big portion and big part. Each one is going to be different based on what you're using. For the general user and stuff like that, the message to waiting, the voice header, the response headers, not going to be a big deal at all. Okay. Alrighty. So that's your DMR basic settings. Once again, biggest one right here, own ID. Can't stress that enough. Now let's go to DMR contacts. Alrighty. DMR contacts is where we start to break the structure down of who are we talking to. Are we talking to groups of people? Or are we talking to individuals? Or are we talking to any and everybody? Alrighty. So first of all, right away here, I have group. So anytime you're dealing with what we call a group call here, that is going to be considered a talk group. Okay. So for an example, if I was to, as you see here, group 1, ID 1, that would be talk group 1 because it's in a group call format. Group 10 here is a group call on talk group 10. So if I wanted to make, and let's say I was assigned to talk on talk group 700, I might call it TG for talk group 700. I change this to the group call type, and I change this to 700. Now what will end up happening is that when I go and assign, I'll show you how to do that in a little bit, talk group 700 or TG 700, it's a group call. So now I'm going to go on talk group 700. Now we see here we have what we call individual call. Individual call deals with what we call, sometimes referred to as a private call. What this means is that if I key up on an individual call, the DMR data that's coming out from my radio is saying, hey, I am seeking out ID, blah, 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 blah. So let's say in this case, this is going to be user, and let's say the user ID of the other person I want to use is 555. All righty. I'm going to change this to individual call. And as you see, the drop down is group call, individual call, and we'll go over all call in a minute. Now I'm going to change this to 555. So now what's going to happen is when I key up on my DMR radio and it's programmed for user 555, it's going to call out on that frequency when it's keying up in that data burst, that header, and saying, I only want to talk to radio ID 555. So if radio ID, let's say 1000 is there, radio ID 1000 saying, oh, hey, remember we had the ID of 12345. Hey, radio 12345 is calling user 555. I'm 1000, so I don't give a crap. I'm not going to listen. Boom, and I disregard it. Does that make sense? So that's where private calls happen. And we'll get into programming a private call, but private calls, some sysadmins, whether it be business or whether it be amateur, they kind of hate it. And reason is it ties up a slot on there. And we'll get that when we're getting programming, okay? But then now let's go to user here. So I'm going to go to user, and then I'm going to say user 120, and their ID is 120. That happens to be their radio ID. So when we're doing individual call, we're talking about the user's ID, the ID that we programmed in here, okay, that own ID. So the other radios that we would be dealing with in this case would be 555 and 120. Finally, I'm going to do what they call an all call. Now, an all call is a special parameter in the DMR framing structure, the tier, the definition of it, that says, I don't care what ID you have. I don't care what talk group you're on. When I use all call, it's acting like it's keying up every single talk group and every single ID private call at once. It's like keying up the radio automatically. Use the all call sparingly. Okay, pretend it's an 80s movie, and when you use all call, you're like entering the 666 code and hitting launch. Because what's happening is that you are going to go ahead and go across all the IDs and all the groups on that time slot. Okay, don't do that. If you do that, especially in amateur, you'll key up everybody. You'll piss people off. Business, there are some people that users on a system, they don't even have the ability to enter an all call because, once again, they're keying up everybody. It doesn't matter what ID. So think of it from a commercial standpoint. So say I'm JJK Communications, and on that repeater that I'm also using is a trucking company, and on that repeater is a dump truck company, and on that repeater is a garbage company, right? If they happen to be on the same time slot I am, the minute I take and key up my radio on all call, I'm keying up all of the dump trucks. I'm keying up all the garbage trucks. I'm keying up everybody's on that time slot. So all calls should be used very sparingly. Okay. All right. So this is how you set up what they call the contact list. Now, once again, it's kind of confusing because you're like a contact. Okay, individual calls, that makes sense on contacts, but all calls and group calls, why are they considered contact list? Because it's kind of starting to build this database in the radio of what we have to do, kind of almost like Access, right? Microsoft Access, anybody use that? Or like an Excel spreadsheet, how they link together. This is in essence going to be the phone book of the radio. Now, you see it's in the DMR contact list. Right below this, you will see is what they call a DMR receive group list. Now, let's go into that, okay? I'm going to remove these real quick. What a receive group list is, in sake of a better term, is a group, and as you see, it's only talk groups here, talk groups that when your radio is sitting on a specific frequency, on a specific time slot, your radio can receive all of these talk groups whenever they're keyed. So it's kind of like a, what do you want to call it? A private scan, some people will call it. I've heard it called on there, where basically your radio's sitting, and if you have a receive group list active and that talk group in your receive group comes up, it's going to go ahead and it's automatically going to open up the radio to receive that talk group. Alrighty. I'm going to add all the talk groups now. Do not get confused. Do not get scared. We're going to come to that in just a minute here. Okay. When we start building channels. So that's going to be the receive group list. And we're going to call this, let's just call it, here, let's make it easy. RXGRP1. Receive group 1. Okay, that's what we're going to call it. They're changing the name on there. So let's close that. So that's our DMR settings. So once again, in our DMR settings, DMR basic, check the ID, DMR contacts. This is where we're going to list all the talk groups we could transmit on, all the private calls we want to do, and an all call if need be. And then finally, in our receive group list, this is where we would link or group all those DMR contacts together. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do one more here. I'm going to add, so I have a group type I'm going to add here, and I'm going to call this TG, let's call this TG 67, okay? So talk group 67. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you something here. Receive group list, see TG 67 I just added, not in the group list here, not in the receive group list at all. We're going to go to the channel now, and this is where receive group list, you're going to be like, oh, duh, okay. So now we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and close this out. And let me tell you something real quick. And this might help people because I know a lot of people use hotspots and stuff like that on there. If you have a hotspot device and you have a couple of talk groups that you always use on DMR and you forget to disconnect the talk group through your hotspot, this is a good way to build a contact list on there. So when I use, or have in the past, I should say, used hotspots, and I had in a zone my talk groups that I used, I had like, let's say channels 1 through 14 were all different talk groups that I can transmit and only receive on. But then maybe channel 15 was a receive talk group list one, because in that way, what I could do is I can go to channel 15, and then that channel, when that receive group list, it's going, what it's doing, it's going and checking any activity, checking. Oh, wait, there's activity in group 1. It's going to sit there and wait until all the activity is done on group 1, and it's going to check. Oh, someone's talking on talk group 10. The reason I do that is because if you forget to kill your talk group in your hotspot, this is what's going to help you. Because you could be sitting there, you're like, I'm receiving traffic. What the hell talk group is it? You could turn it to the receive group, and then boom, it'll pop up. Okay, so that's just kind of that's a little word of wisdom from a DMR programmer. All right, so let's go up to channel now. Now in radios, DMR radios, you have in essence two types of channels. You have a mode only channel, and some will allow you to do a mixed mode channel. All right. What we mean by mixed mode is that the radio can receive analog or digital and will only open up when it meets those parameters. In this case, this device does not. This device only allows DMR or analog. So we're going to program these individual channels. So they always start out with a generic one here. So we're going to start out talking here. What we're going to do is we're going to program 2 channels in an analog and digital. One is going to be a repeated channel. One is going to be a simplex channel. Let's do the simplex first. So channel alias, this is what's going to appear if you have it on your display, if you have a radio that has a display. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this DMR, and I'm going to call it dash direct. And just by that, I'm meaning a direct. Now, there's 2 types of simplex in DMR. There is TDMA direct or simplex, and there's regular direct or simplex. Now, what's the difference? Remember, DMR is TDMA. It's that syncing of the channel, right? Some radios, first-gen radios, when they would do direct, they weren't using TDMA. There was no syncing available. You couldn't sync the bits together. You didn't know what time slot or anything. So what would happen is it would be an FDMA. When you're using FDMA, that means it's going direct. There's no timing. It's going direct. That's what it is. What would happen in those cases is that you would only be able to talk simplex to simplex. You wouldn't be able to hear a repeater. So you couldn't be like FM. You know, FM, you could have a repeater, and then sometimes people will put a simplex channel or a direct channel in, and it'll be the output of the repeater. So you could talk to one and one, but then when you go ahead and have to talk directly to each other, you could still hear the repeater if you were talking, that kind of thing in there. So you have to decide if you're going to go ahead and have TDMA in direct mode, meaning you have to pick a slot for the direct mode, or if you're going to be just FDMA. In this case, on this radio here, TDMA direct mode, if I have disabled, it's going to be an FDMA. If I'm going to go in direct mode, then I'd put like a level 1. There's a couple different options, once again, based on the make and manufacturer radio. But in this case, level 1 will be in saying, hey, if I choose time slot 1 or time slot 2, the other radio is going to have to be in level 1, time slot 1, or time slot 2. So what happens in this case, if I'm going to be talking to one another in direct mode, if someone else, and we have TDMA and level 1 turned on, but if I'm on time slot 1 and he's on time slot 2, not going to hear one another. If I'm on slot 1 and he's on slot 1, we're level 1, so time slot 1, level 1, we're going to hear each other. Okay, so this is important to understand about TDMA direct mode. TDMA direct mode has become really prevalent in the last 3-4 years. Before, it didn't have that option. And even more so, what would happen is that you would have people who would be buying radios, and they would think that the radios are incompatible with one another because the radio would allow them to do TDMA direct mode, while the other radio didn't have that option. They set it up simplex, and they're like, well, I'm on this frequency and this color code, and why aren't we hearing one another? And we're on this talk group. Why aren't we hearing one another? Well, I don't know. And then someone would say, well, I'm on, well, I don't know. I guess Motorola won't talk to Kenwood, or Hytera won't talk to TYT or Chinese radio or something. No, that wasn't it. A lot of it came down to here. And that's what I have a lot of people that will contact me and say, John, hey, my DMR radio doesn't talk to my DMR radio. Why isn't that working? Well, because, hey, let's take a look at it. Frequency's right. Yeah. Color code's right. Yeah. Contact's right. Yep. Okay. Aha, you're on simplex. Okay. So just understanding on it. Now, so you have to select that on there. The next thing you want to do is once you have that selected, immediately go to the frequency. So in this case, we're going to go 464.750. Okay. Color code. Color code, as we talked about, is like the equivalent of like a PL or a CTCSS tone. Color codes allow you to go from 0, which is no color code, it's sort of like a carrier squelch, all the way up to, and I'm going to go up here, all the way up to number 15. Does it matter which one you use? No, it doesn't. It's just like picking a PL tone. Does it matter which one you use? No. Maybe you might have some requirements, okay? Maybe you might say, hey, we're going to use color code 8 for all simplex or direct operations. Whatever, that's up to you, okay? That's totally up to you. Alrighty, contacts. Here's where we built all of those contacts before. So notice, we're under transmit. This is another thing to be very careful of. Some radios will do receive and then transmit. Some radios will have you build transmit and then do receive. So be very careful when you are programming a radio, because Some people put it in reverse. Some people think, oh, wait a minute here. Okay, no, wait. I need to do this and this and this. And it's going to go ahead and be, excuse me, it's going to go ahead and be 464.750 is the receive of the repeater, and the transmit would be 469.750. Well, they put it in backwards. They can't key up the repeater. Aha, because transmit needs to be 469. Okay, example. This is, in this case, simplex. So we're going to be 464.750, color code of 8. This case, this is where we're going to select the talk group to use. So are we going to talk on talk group 1? Are we going to talk on talk group 10? Are we going to do talk group 700, talk group 67, 55, direct, like a user ID, direct user ID, or 120? This is going to select if it's a group call, like a talk group, or an individual call. In this case, I'm going to select group 1, power level, low or high in this case. This radio only allows that. Now, here is a big one. I'm going to pop this up here. Advent criteria. Okay? Very, very, very important for there. This really can cause problems. What it is, you have basically telling the radio, when can I key up, when can't I key up? And in this case, admin criteria, TX allow. TX allow means it will, in this case, the modem, will allow the radio to transmit when you push the PTT. Okay? Doesn't matter if there's another user or anything like that on there. If there's another person talking, you push that push to talk button, cause the radio to key up, it's gonna key up. Channel idle, or channel free, here, means the modem will check for an idle channel prior to allowing the transmission, or the radio will in this case. So what it will do is that when you're on, in this case, this frequency, slot 1, color code 8, what's going to happen is that it's going to check, and if there's no transmission from anybody, not just on your talk group, not just on there, if that channel has to be 100% clear, it will allow you to key up. The final one will be color code idle, okay? Or it will go ahead and ask and see if that color code is being used. So it's going to check and say, hey, is color code 8 being used? Is anybody talking on color code 8? And if it says, nope, no one's talking on color code 8, then the radio is going to transmit. If, for some reason, you have a situation... technological glitches, I'll tell you. Alrighty, so color, getting back to it, pardon the blurb there, but color code free is going to then relate to basically boiling down and saying, listen, here's the deal. If someone's using that color code 8, I'm not going to key up whatsoever. So this is going to come down into the system that you use. 99% of the time, TX allow is where people sit and reside at. Okay, that's where people sit. And that's basically saying, when I key up, I want to do that. The channel free, the color code free, they really kind of come down when you start to program when you basically start to program a radio on like a repeater, a public repeater, or maybe like you have an amateur repeater that has multiple talk groups on there. So keep that in mind, not a big deal. Timeout timer, I always turn it up to 90 seconds. That's what I use. If I'm going to start talking more than 90 seconds, I probably should rethink what I'm talking, whether it be amateur or business, because what's going to happen is you don't want to get long-winded. Plus, also, too, is what happens if a radio accidentally bumps the PTT button? After 90 seconds, it's going to do that. Timeout timer rekey delay, some people use that. Basically, will say, hey, my radio just keyed up and timed out. Now I have to wait, in this case, 3 seconds, or I have to wait 0 seconds, whatever you want to do. Now, this individual call confirm here. What this basically means is that this can be set up on a channel that if someone calls you, that there's confirmation that's on your radio and their radio that it has been triggered, or that it has been connected to one another. So an example, if I pull up here where it says, uncheck when initiating a call to send a call request that's not recognized, initiating a call when a call is sent to confirm the request. So if I was going to private call, if I was going to change the contact to, let's say, user 55, then I might want to check that. Because then what that's going to do is when I key up on user 55, it's going to try to ping out to user 55 and initiate the call request and get an ACK back from that radio to say, hey, can you hear me? How you doing? Are you hearing me? Okay. And then your radio will get an acknowledgement back. That is a nice thing, especially when you're on a direct channel or simplex channel and you're trying to talk, because you don't know if you're in range of that person. You don't know if that person's able to hear you or what the case may be. But when you do this individual call timer connection there, this is going to allow you to basically let you know, oh, hey, Bill's radio is on. Let me wait for a response. All righty. Now, as you notice here, it's a simplex. It's a direct only channel. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit copy. And then it immediately, boom, copied everything over here. So see that, how nice it is? It copied everything over there. We're all good. Copied the color code here. Now we get into this receive group list or not. So now here's what's going to happen. When we're looking in the transmit, notice the TX contact is group 1. If I have the receive group list as none, this channel is only going to transmit and listen on talk group 1. And it's only going to listen for talk group 1. So transmit on talk group 1 here. We'll go to talk group 700, make it easier. It's going to transmit on talk group 700 and listen only on talk group 700. Remember earlier when I built receive group 1? What did receive group 1 have? Let's go back to that real quick. Take a look at it. It had talk group 700, group 1, and group 10. So now, close this back up, go over to our direct channel again. Now what's going to happen if I have this set up for receive group 1, this channel is still going to talk or transmit on talk group 700, okay, TX 700, but it's always going to be receiving and listening for 700, talk group 1, and group 10. 700, group 1, group 10. 700, group 1, group 10. It's always going to be doing that. It's always going to be sitting on there. And it's then going to stop on the first talk group that has traffic on it in that receive group and sit and wait there until it's done with traffic. People say, well, John, this is scan. No, it's not. Scan is completely different. Scan is completely different. This is where those receive talk groups are important. So, once again, good example. I have, let's say, in here, I'll use an example. Let's say I'm a supervisor, okay? Let's say group 1 is floor staff, and let's say I'm a supervisor in a manufacturing plant. Group 1 may be front half manufacturing, and group 10 might be the rear of the building manufacturing, and then group 700 might be the admin talk group, okay? Supervisors, okay? So I could talk to the group 1 supervisors, and I can talk to group 10 supervisors. This is our talk group. But I want to hear if traffic's going on 100 and 700 at the same time, okay, as well as 10. So what's going to happen here is my radio's sitting, it's programmed here, it's listening here. Okay, guess what? It's listening to 700. Someone calls me on 700, my radio's going to receive 700. When no one is talking on 700, it's going to be listening to group 701 and 10, 701, 10. It's kind of behind the scenes scan. And if talk group 1 comes up or group 1 starts talking, I'm going to go ahead and my radio is going to stop and listen on group 1. It's going to listen on group 1 until one or two things. One, people are done talking on talk group 1, or the other is someone calls me on talk group 700. This is nice, once again, if you are in a situation where you have to monitor multiple talk groups on a single frequency or a single slot on a repeater, okay? That's what this is for. If you're not sure about it, if you don't want to hear traffic all the time, turn this to none and just sit on your own talk group here, okay? Now, let's go program let's add a channel here. So we go over here, we click add a channel. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to call this, so the first one is DMR direct. We're going to call this DMR RPT for repeater. We're going to be on time slot 1, and then we're going to leave it disabled because we want a repeater frequency. Now, mind you this, watch this. Do you notice how when I put it on SDI level 1, it grayed out the receive? Because it's a simplex channel. Now notice how I have it disabled, And now look what's happening. Now I can change the transmit and receive frequency independently. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on, let's say the repeater is 156.125. Okay. And color code is 1. And on this one, I want to talk on talk group 67 through the repeater. I want high power. I want to be able to talk whenever I key up. Timeout timer, I like 90 seconds here. Not going to do any individual call because we're not going to do private call on this one here. So now what I can do is I can do one or two things to make it easy. I can enter all this frequency and stuff again, or I could hit copy. Now notice it came over with the 456. So what I got to do is, UHF in this case is 5 megahertz difference. Now why did I go down? Because you go in high, so radio is going to transmit on 456, but it's going to receive low, 451, okay? So in this case, 456.125, I transmit a repeater. 451.125, I receive. Color code 1. Yes, some repeaters may have split color code, and that's a whole different thing on there. Talk group 67, I only want to listen to talk group 67. Power high, transmit allowed. Guess what? Boom, I'm done. I just did my repeater. Now if I want to do, and you know what I'm going to do? DMR repeater, I'm going to add this to 67. So this is what I'm going to do on here. So I know in my alias it's there. I'm going to add another repeater here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that repeater. This time I'm going to call it DMR. And I'm going to put dash RPT. And this time it's going to be 1. Okay? But I'm not going to be on slot 1 this time. I'm going to be on slot 2. So I've changed it to slot 2. It's repeated. Once again, we're going to go 456.125. And it's color code 1. Group 1, great. Power high, great. Going to change that to 90 seconds. I'm just telling you from personal experience, folks, I've burned myself on open mics and crap like that. So have a timeout timer. But once again, we're going to do this. We're going to change it to 451. And I'm going to turn off receive group list. And now, excuse me, here we go. 456.125 transmit, color code 1 on talk group 1, TX. And then in receive, it's going to receive in the repeater, color code 1. Once again, this is DMR repeater talk group 1. I'm on time slot 2. It's going to be using talk group 67 on time slot 1. So you see that? So now I have 2 DMR repeated channels, each on a different time slot, different talk groups, same color code, same frequency on there. So there you go. Now you've just programmed that in there. Now we're going to go over to the analog side. Analog side's pretty easy. Okay, pretty easy on there. We're going to call this, we're going to do FM direct. Now, the reason we're going to do this is we're going to copy this as a DMR direct. So we're going to go 464.750. So we're going to go 464.750. I could either use a CTCSS or a DCS, or I should say PL or DPL. If I don't want a tone, I can collect voice only. In this case, we're going to use... let's go DPL or DCS. And this time I'm going to go ahead and use, I'm going to select from the list here and, excuse me, I'm going to use DPL 125. Power high. Now here's the thing about this one here. Admit criteria on some of these radios also too, do also happen for analog. So TX allow, the modem will always, or the radio will always transmit when the push to talk is pressed. Channel free, the modem will check for an idle channel primary transmission. So let's make sure there's no audio, no interference, no nothing. The modem will check if the specific tone is matched prior to allowing. So basically it's going to sit and saying, hey, is DCS 125 being used? If not, I can transmit. If so, yes. Or then here it says CTCSS, DCS not matched. The modem will check specific tone is not matched prior to allowing. So you have a couple of different options on there. Once again, TX allows what I usually use. Timeout timer, once again, do that 90 seconds because I'm going to burn myself. If it's a simplex, just click copy over. Look at that. Copied it right over. Not a problem on there. Alrighty. If you are an amateur, sometimes you'll probably want it on FM, change it to 25 kilohertz. Otherwise, narrowband for business. I click copy over there. That's it. It's very simple to building an actual repeated channel on there. Let's do a repeated channel on analog just because, hey, we're in there. Let's do it, okay, here. So now I'm going to go ahead and do FM, and we're going to put RPT. And here we go, FM RPT. And in this case, let's say that repeater is 462.500. But wait a minute. Oh, Let's transmit. I almost burned myself. So 5 up would be 467.500. And I need a tone to get into repeater of, let's do a good old one. Let's do 118.8. I like that one. 118.8, high limitations, timer there. Now I'm going to copy it over. Remember, 5 down. So 462.500 is what I will receive on with the CTCSS tone of 118.8. And then I'm going to transmit on 467.500, CTCSS tone 118.8. Now, we have the repeater set up. Notice on here, if you don't like squelch tails, some business radios will allow you to put in a tail degree. 120 degree phase, 180 degree phase. What that does is that if you have a squelch tail on the CTCSS tone, sometimes when you unkey a repeater, there's that little reverse burst of the PL tone. So you unkey it and you hear that. What happens is when you have a tail degree, either 120 or 180, what it's doing then is it's like after you're done talking, it's copy that. That's it. Goes silent and quiet right away. Love that. Love that on there. One of the reasons sometimes I use business radios or LMR-based radios for amateur use, they have that reverse tone on there to make it so it doesn't go like that. Hate that on there. Alrighty, so we have this DMR set up. We have the analog channel set up. We have our DMR settings. Now what we need to do is we need to put them in there and say, hey, our zone and our radio, how do we do this? Well, here we go. We have it on here. So what I want to do is first of all, I want to bring over that DMR channel first that we added. And this is where a lot of people get screwed up. They take the time, they build a great code plug, they build a great DMR channel, FM channels, everything, but then they got to put them into the zones here, okay? So in our radio, I want to be able to talk on the DMR direct frequency first. Then I want to be able to talk on the repeater with talk group 67. I want to be able to talk on repeater 1. And then I want to talk on the FM repeater. And then I want to talk on FM direct. Now what we have here is my channels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this zone. So channel 1 is DMR direct. Channel 2 is DMR repeater 67, DMR repeater 1, FM repeater, and FM direct. So now I'd write that into the radio and boom, the radio would be good to go ahead and program. All right, so that's just building one here. I'm going to bring up another one. This is from Xera portable I have, an EP8100. Now, if you notice here, this gets into a lot more stuff, so we're not going to be talking about DMR trunking today. Okay, we're not going to be talking about MPT on there. Once again, told you, I have MPT trunking. I love it. We're going to focus on conventional. When we get into the conventional here, notice on this radio, it's a little different. So when you get into multi-mode radios, they really can be different on there. Excuse me once again. The reason I brought this radio up is because there are some features in here that can be used in business as well as amateur. I wanted to touch on. So first of all, what we're going to do is we would go through the common. So radio alias, what mode of operation we're going to be using on the radio, different things you can do when it powers up. So you can have the radio ID, you can have an alias on there. These are all little tweaks and tunes and settings and blah, 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 blah that you have. We're going to close up this here. We're going to go under general settings. So the first thing here on general settings, what we'll do is look at that squelch open level. If you want to open that squelch level, hit a button on there. Once again, kind of some of the things you do, this is all going to be based on what the radio is capable of, programmable buttons. So for an example, on this one here, I could look, okay, hey, here's what I can do. I could program this button, I could program this button, I could program these side buttons, these kind of things like there. That's all here. It's individual, okay? Menu system, individual. Network, we're not going to be talking about network in the radios. Let's get in here, down here. What's the first thing we're going to do is bring up the channel. But what did I always say? Go to DMR services first. Basic settings. Look at that. ID. So in this case, I'm going to do ID 100. Okay. Group call hang time. 3,000 milliseconds. That's 3 seconds. I'm going to take that down. Let's just put 1,000 on there, or 1,000 milliseconds, or 1 second. Private call hang time. Now, once again, private call hang time is kind of what we talked about earlier. When someone does a private call with me, we initiate a private call. How long will my radio stay in private call mode until it reverts back to whatever talk group or channel that I'm on? Okay, so that's where it's important to do this. And I usually leave it as 3 seconds on there. That's not bad. Here's where we have a couple of the different functions. So Radio disable, enable, decode. So you have a lot of the stuff here. So for an example, alert call decode. Someone can send out an alert on a radio my radio will beep and saying, oh, wait a minute. Hey, someone sent out alert. Alert call talkback. So someone sends an alert to me saying, hey, beep, 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 beep. Oh, hey, Bill needs me to call him. Brr, hey, Bill, what's going on? Radio check decode. That's once again that pinging of the radio, beeping the radio saying, hey, can you hear me? Is your radio turned on? And the radio goes back and says, yeah, hey, I'm turned on. And it's like, oh, okay. Then the other user says, oh, I know he's on. Radio disable and enable decode. What this basically means is that you can basically set it up. If you have a fleet of radios, business people, we do this a lot. Like, for example, we have all this turned on. So someone goes ahead and a radio gets stolen, or worse yet, they don't pay their bill, they can disable the radio remotely. Remote monitor decode. DMR has the ability that you could send a remote monitor. And what this happens is someone else, if you have this turned on, they know your ID, they could ping your ID, and they could actually remote monitor your radio, turn your radio to start transmitting for 10 seconds. Okay? I always suggest turning that off. Remote disable, enable, decode. That's a horse apiece. Someone could disable your radio, but you can enable it on yourself. That's not a big deal. But once again, on the business side, this is very important. All call priority interrupt. Radio disable priority interrupt. All that kind of stuff there. Emergency high power transmit. So if you hit the emergency button, all these kind of things on there. These are once again little tweaky things on there. Biggest thing, radio ID. Radio ID. I can't stress that enough. Okay? I hate it when I see duplicate IDs. It's a pet peeve of mine. All right. We're going to go under here, though. We did it. Contacts, once again. This radio, though, notice this radio has separate groupings for private and group call. Well, the other radio was all in one list. So this is going to, once again, come down to what radio you have, okay? So in this one, private call. So if I wanted to do alias, I'm going to say Tim, and his ID is going to be 200. Whoop, 200. I'm going to say Bill, and his ID is going to be 300. Too many zeros tonight. And then Jess, the ultimate boss, her ID is 400. So now I have these set up. So right now when I would turn on to the radio, what I could do is I could look at the radio and say, okay, I program it. Hey, I want to talk to Tim directly. I want to talk to Bill directly. I want to talk to Jess directly. Okay. If it was like amateur, these could be their individual DMR IDs that they have, and you could put their aliases in there. It's up to you. Alrighty. That's under private call. Once again, this is different. Okay. Now let's talk about group call. Group call here. So we're going to do it before. We're going to do TG. I'm going to change it so it's a little bit easier for me. So I'm going to take TG1. That's talk group 1. And then we had, remember, TG10. And that's talk group 10. And then I have TG700. And that's going to be 700. And actually what I'll do is, I don't want to change this. I'm going to put it as admin. And then I'm going to put TG67. And that's going to be 67. Notice, once again, under group call here. All these are group calls. If I need to add more, I can add more on there. Now, we're going to go to receive group list, just like before. Receive group list. We can add whatever we want. So I can change this to all. And then maybe receive group 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change it to... and I'll throw admin in there also, too. Okay. And maybe I'm just going to do staff. Okay. Okay. So maybe we change it to easier. Here, we're going to go RX all. So then that way I know. And then I'm going to change this to RX staff. And once again, this is just naming it easier. Okay. Just making it easier for you. So now I have that all in there. I'm not going to worry about encryption on this one. We're not going to get into encryption. If you're using for amateur, you can't. If you're using for business, encryption is a whole different episode. All right, so now what we're going to do here is let's program it like before. So this one, I'm going to go ahead and do DMR, and we're going to do direct, DIR, like we did before. And that's color code 8 we used. And we used slot 1. And then what we're going to do on here is we're going to do duplex encode or decode. So what that basically means is it's using it for the same frequency kind of on there. Otherwise, we could turn it off. So there's a couple different ways. This here is the TDMA direct mode. That is, once again, we're talking the direct mode. Okay, so you want to make sure if someone's on TDMA direct mode, you need to be on TDMA direct mode also, like we talked about before. And this is VHF, so let's just go ahead and say, because maybe the repeaters are connected. Let's say it's, here, we'll do 158.400. Yeah, I know it's a business frequency. But notice this one here. Receive is the first, transmit is the second here. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm building it kind of in reverse from the other one. And I just want to listen to my own, okay? I'm going to click over here. Now here's a transmit. Transmit type here. Now this is different. Once again, private call or group call. Okay, I'm going to do admin on this one, okay? Because we're going to talk on 700. Now notice, though, you have private and group call. And notice it came in, it looked kind of weird. So let me put that back there. See how it looks and shows like a little phone and says none? Wait a minute. Why is that showing a phone? It's not a phone. Remember, it's like a phone book, okay? Once here, admin criteria, in-call criteria. So admin, always free, channel free, or color code free, which we talked about on there. Let me scroll down a little bit more. In-call transmit admit. So if someone wants to jump in, you could do that. Timeout timer. I'm going to do that to 90 seconds. If you have an emergency button on your radio, want to do it. Some do, some don't. You can program an emergency system. We're not going to use that on here. Phone system. Some DMR networks, some DMR repeaters have the ability to do a phone interconnect or like an auto patch or some sort of thing like that on there, okay? So different, once again, these are a lot of per system things on there. But here we have it, and we could do, this could be down here if we're doing GPS channel revert if the radio's on there and everything like that. But we're scrolling back up to the top here. Here we are. So DMR direct, color code 8. I want to do in TDMA direct mode. Got to make sure I'm at the right time slot. So am I in the right time slot? Let me check up here. Yep, it's on slot 1. There we go. We're good to go. Now, one other thing here. I want to talk to you about it. We're going to go here and make a repeater real quick. Okay? So let's do DMR repeater. And here real quick, I hope everybody got that. It was really the same thing as before. Not a big deal. We're going to go repeater 1 here. We're going to use color code 1 on there. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to scroll down here. And let's just say our repeater is 152,600. I'm just going to do none. And then let's say the input is 157,650. These are fake made up. Don't panic here, okay? Some people are like, oh, what frequency is that? Okay, no, don't panic. Here's what it is. So right now I receive on 152,600. I transmit on 157.650. It's a group call. I'm going to go repeater, group call 1. Alrighty. Now here's the cool part. Some radios, we're talking business radio. We're not seeing this too many on TYT radios or anything like that on there. But some of the radios have slot selections. So we talked about slot 1 versus slot 2, right? Here's this thing called pseudo trunk. Alrighty. Here's where pseudo trunk is pretty friggin' awesome. This will allow you to take this radio and in pseudo trunk, alrighty, you can then take and when the radio, instead of saying, okay, so normally remember we had to say we're always in slot 1 on this talk group. No. Pseudo trunk will say, okay, you put me in pseudo trunk. I'll try slot 1 first. So your radio keys up. You take your radio, you key up, and you're like, if trunk 1 is busy or slot 1 is busy for your DMR talk group, what's going to happen? The radio is going to say, oh, slot 1 is busy. I'm in pseudo trunk mode. I can now go on slot 2. And I talked about that last time. I'm kind of on there too, because it's kind of like a little bit of a trunking mode. But I'll tell you, this is totally awesome. Alrighty. Totally awesome if you are building a system, if you're a business owner and you have a DMR system or something like that, the pseudo trunking is really, really cool on that. It's really super cool on there. So just kind of a little bit of a thing on there. And the reason I say is Hytera I know has it. Obviously Xera here has it. I think maybe Kenwood or Motorola. I think Kenwood calls it auto slot now, but they're all kind of the same thing. So just remember, when you're building this, though, you got to know. Because if you, let's say I put it in this radio here, and let's say I take another radio and I force it to slot 1, well, guess what? If I key up and slot 1's busy, this would stay on slot 1, because this radio says all I can do is slot 1. But if I'm on the other radio that has pseudo trunk and slot 1's busy, it's going to move over to slot 2 the other radio is not going to know about it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, one of the things I wanted to pull up here, and this is why I did a different one, is the roaming. Okay, some radios have the ability to build a roaming list in it. Okay, and what a roaming list is basically what you could do is you can add different repeaters together. So if you are on a linked system of repeaters, if you are on, let's say your business has multiple repeaters, like for example, one of the hospitals I know, they have a linked system on there that all the hospitals have their own DMR repeater where you can talk locally, or they can connect up to each other on one of the time slots on there and talk group. Roaming allows you to do this. Roaming allows you to put a list of repeaters in there on that talk group. And what will happen is when you're on that roaming list, what it will do is you can go to a repeater. The roaming list will pick out that repeater. Look at this RSSI threshold. And once it goes ahead and sees that RSSI threshold, then what it will do is it will try to search for another repeater. When it sees that other repeater, that's, let's say, repeater number 2 on the list, boom, then it's going to go ahead and go over there. So roaming is kind of cool. Roaming is kind of complicated, but I know there are some people that use it. So this is just kind of a cool kind of feature and aspect on there. Alrighty. That is kind of it for looking at some of the programming on here. And now we come to this week's quick. You know what really bends my antenna? You know what really bends my antenna? All this about programming. As you see here tonight, can it be a pain in the programming? It can. It really can. And I wanted to do this episode, and I know we're over an hour, and I apologize. I do apologize. But it's really important for you to know how to program your DMR radio. Alrighty? Whether it be business, whether it be amateur, it is really, really important. And the reason being is because if you don't know how to program your radio, you are two things. One, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And two, you're at the mercy of someone else. Three, if you want to add on, their fat fingers are your downfall. What I mean by fat fingers is, and I do it sometimes too, you know what, you're typing on something and you maybe you don't look at it, and you know what, maybe you're trying to go ahead and program in a repeater on 145.11, but you know what, you fat finger it, and the person who built the code plug for you went along and did 154.11. Well, guess what? That's not an amateur frequency at all. That is a business. Actually, I think probably in the public safety range on there. So then you're at the mercy of that person. Please, please, please take the time to set up your own code plug. Even if you don't want to enter all the information on it, learn what you want and get tutors. Come here, watch this video again. Contact me, contact someone who knows about DMR. We will help you. You will make yourself succeed in DMR. You will make yourself fail in DMR. I know of many, many businesses that have gone and purchased DMR radios, moved from FM to DMR because they said it's digital, it's going to be better. And in essence, for them, it would be better. But because they didn't understand the programming or something got screwed up, the exact answer was the hell with it. This is nothing but a pain in the bleep. It doesn't have to be. It really doesn't. But once again, you have to take up that responsibility. You have to own up to it to say, hey, guess what? I need to learn how to program my radios. Once again, this is not just amateurs. This is not just business. Business and LMR are a little bit easier to do it because not many people program their own radios, especially if they're renting time on a system. Hell, the system sysops or the owners, like me, for example, I'm not going to let you go ahead and program your own radio to be on a system because then you could use my system illegally. Then you can do things wrong. You could screw up other people's radios, cause problems, cause interference. I was like, no. But especially if you're in the amateur world, guess what? You got to do that. And in addition about it, what you also have to do if we go one step further in the amateur world is you have to know how to program it. Are you using a repeater? Are you using a hotspot? What are you using? What's the difference between a repeater and a simplex? In the analog world, it was pretty damn simple. You either transmit it on a repeater, you transmit on one frequency, you listen on another, and if you're on a simplex, guess what? Boom, you're on that same simplex frequency. Maybe you need to add a CTCSS PL tone or DPL tone, whatever, or maybe you don't. It's pretty simple. But not when you get into digital. You do have little idiosyncratic things that I pointed out. TDMA direct mode or non-TDMA direct mode. And if you're in TDMA direct mode, slot 1 or slot 2, then you have to deal with color codes. Then you have to deal with talk groups. Oh my God, it's not really that difficult. If you sit down and build what they call a fleet map. Yes, a fleet map. And those who have been in public safety or business communications, you remember the term, and you've been in there for a while, or we used a trunk system, you knew what a fleet map was. Is nothing to be scared about. What we built tonight was in essence a fleet map. We said, hey, here's the talk groups I need. Hey, here's where I need to talk to them, either in simplex or repeated, or direct or repeated. And then, hey, if I'm on a repeater, I know I need to add in color codes, or if I'm on direct, I need to add in a color code. Okay? Don't be afraid to do it. And more importantly, don't be afraid to ask. Once again, you will succeed or you will fail. It is no one else's fault. Alrighty. That is basically it for demystifying DMR part 2 programming. Yes, it was in depth, but I hope you guys got a lot out of it on there. I did try to sit down and really kind of try to break it down to a really easy level to use. And once again, if you're just a DMR user in your business world, guess what? This is probably pretty simple. They're going to tell you, pick up the radio, transmit on channel 1 to talk to these people, 2 or whatever. But if you get to be a sysadmin or you're doing it for, let's say, personal usage or whatever, guess what? I hope this was a great primer for you and you can follow step by step. Don't ever be afraid to ask for any help. I will tell you that. Don't be afraid to email us, communications-cigar@jjkacom.com. Until then, I want to say 73 to everybody. Please stay safe out there, and hopefully the weather's getting better where you're at, or it's going to be better soon. So if you got them, definitely smoke them. Until next episode, take care.